Hey everybody, DM Jim here. Welcome to a new episode of the Tabletop Engineer. You may be able to hear it in my voice. I have been fighting a sinus infection now for over a week. It is just kicking me up and down. But I'm not using that as an excuse not to deliver you a new project video this week. I will use it as an excuse to tell you that this is part one of two. I was really hoping to get this project finished in one video, but I have just between the coughing and the headaches and just dealing with all this mess, I didn't get it finished, and I do apologize. As you can tell by the title, I am doing I'm not going to call it a junk build, because 95% of what is in this is either chipboard, paper, or foam. Very little in the way of junk. What inspired this project was Bill, or Wylock, over at Wylock's Armory. He just released a video where he recreated a miniature for a very popular science fiction war game, but he recreated it, his own version of it, using just junk. And he uses it as a proxy in a home game because, as I understand it, you can't use handmade or homemade models when you go play in tournaments and stuff like that. It really inspired me, and a while back, Bill had sort of challenged me to build a certain type of tank. It's a big tank. It was way more than I was ready to bite off for the first attempt. So I have chosen a smaller tank for that game. Again, this is just my take on a particular game model, making a homemade version. Not trying to steal anybody's thunder or sales. If you attempt to do something like this, it's going to look totally different, just like Bill's model looked totally different from the inspiration, the source that it was. So let's get to the tabletop. Let me show you and explain what I am attempting to do right now. This is a step one, or a baby step. Let's call it that. I have some bigger plans for some larger models. I need to get my feet wet, need to figure out some new techniques, which you should see in this video. So I'm using my Proxy table, and I'm doing some interesting cuts to make certain shapes. So let's get to the tabletop. I will get this project started, and then next week we'll wrap it up, okay? Let's go to the tabletop. I began this project by printing out the side profiles to scale of the tank and gluing them onto chipboard. I cut these out and then used these chipboard pieces as a template that I taped down onto a piece of 1/2-inch foam and cut them out with my Proxy. And then I glued these chipboard pieces to the sides of the foam to create the tracks for the tank. While that was drying, I cut out additional pieces of cardstock with a profile, and I cut out the center of these. And the reason I did this was this creates a layered, it's going to give the appearance of like metal layers. So right here, I'm putting down the first layer, and then I cut out another piece with a little more raised bit of the detail and glue it over the top. And the effect is sort of this raised metal look. Next, I started working out on the central body. Now, this required some trial and error trying to get the right thickness. I made some marks to determine the height, and then I glued two pieces together, let it dry, and then used the Proxy to trim some bevels. While that was drying, I used cardstock and cut some pieces to go around the two tracks. And then I used cardstock to cut a bunch of little tiny tread pieces, as you see here, and I started gluing them all the way around the tracks. While the tracks were drying, I finished up the main body, and I apologize for the blurriness here, but it basically just required some bevel cuts and then test fitting it until I was happy. And then I glued it between the two track halves here and let that dry really well. Once it was dry, I started adding the greeblies, which is just bunches and bunches of little teeny pieces that give it detail and make it more three-dimensional. They raise up sections And as you can see here, I'm continuing to add bits and pieces to the sides. These are called Sponsons, and they're where the side guns will be mounted, and I had to cut them in an unusual way. I first cut a rectangular piece of foam, and then I made marks where I needed to cut out a void. I ended up having to cut off the bottom pieces, cut out the void, and then glue on the bottom pieces so that there's this cube cut out of the entire piece. Some of the photos at the end of the video will give you a little bit more detail on that. I glued those to the side, and then I started working again with more greeblies on the side of the tank instead of the front and back. Here I am just putting some hatches and some various pieces in place. One of the things I did here, there were some raised circular pieces, kind of like gears. And what I used for that was I used these stick-on jewel, I don't know what you call them, they're like little jewel pieces, as you can see here, multiple colors, rainbows, and I just started gluing those in place to give me that raised gear. This is where I am going to stop right now. This is the base of the tank and basically one side done. I haven't glued the little rivets onto the other side and done some of the detail work. If you watch the video closely, you'll notice that every time I make a piece to add on this side, I would take a matching one and push it sort of up off the mat so I remember it's there so that I could recreate this mirror image. I want to let these dry really well before I tackle this side. The fact that this has symmetry really helps. It also is sort of a pain because when you're using foam, you don't want to use a hot glue gun too much. You can use it for small things, but it melts the foam, so you want to be careful with it. So I'm having to use tacky glue, and the tacky glue just requires time to dry. So what I'm going to do next, of course, for next week, this thing will hopefully, knock on wood, be done. I need to tackle this side. I also need to tackle the front of the tank and the turret. And then I learned a new word. These are called, sponsons. Sponsons? These side things on the tank that will have guns in them. S-P-O-N-S-O-N. Sponson, I believe is the word. I could be wrong. Those were interesting to cut. What I did was I cut the piece, then I trimmed this bottom off, and then used the Proxy to cut out the negative here, and then I glued this piece back on. Very tricky to do that with a blade. Very tricky to do that with a Proxy in making a cut out, making a void that has 90 degrees. So that was an interesting little trick that I needed to come up with. But all in all, I'm really happy with how this thing is turning out. Obviously, once it's primed and painted, I think it's going to look a lot better. Again, as always, I look at stuff that I make and I think it just doesn't look that great. But I trust that when it gets to the prime and painting part, it will look good. So again, I apologize to you that I didn't have a complete project. I have just been fighting this thing, and I'm feeling better. I'm on some antibiotic, but it really kicked me. And I missed my game night this week, and I missed Dragon Con last weekend. It's been a rough week, so please forgive me, and just know that I'll be working on this to get it ready for part 2, the conclusion. And hopefully I'll have learned some things from this, because now I want to tackle some bigger models. We'll see what comes of that. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Please hit the subscribe button if you'd like to be notified when new videos are up. If you want to join me over at the Tabletop Engineer Facebook page, I do tend to do a weekly live event on Wednesday. I missed this week as well. And, we have various conversations going on over there that you might enjoy. Things that don't make it onto the video. And what else? Bexham's Bazaar. Number 9 just came out. Very pleased with it. Thank you for all my contributors who helped make that magazine great this month. Issue number 10 will be out on October 1st. If you're a subscriber, thank you. If you are not a subscriber, please consider it. It's $2 an issue per month. Every issue comes out at the first of the month. And if you don't subscribe, you can still get it at DriveThruRPG, but it's $3 an issue. And if you do subscribe, though, there are some added benefits that you can check out. So all the information is in the description below, including a link where you can download issue number 6 for free, so you can check out what the magazine is all about. This is DM Jim. I'll see you next week for the conclusion of this project. Take care.